Yo.
There we are. How are you?
I'm good. I think starting to show the signs of a very busy season. So last time I was like all made up, and today I'm here. So let me turn the volume up. I didn't do the mic or anything. I was so on it last time, and yeah, just today it's a little more pared down. But
It's okay. It is totally fine. The conversations, all that matters.
yes.
That's all that matters. But you got your coffee already?
Oh yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it was that or an afternoon nap, and I
Mm.
just I'm gonna
They
try
both
to.
feel pretty similar.
Yep. I think it's the cooler weather. It just kind of makes you want to like snuggle up and stay inside. So
Yes, that is true. So before we hopped on here, you had mentioned the word chaos.
yes.
And actually, I had another podcast interview earlier today, and I brought up the word chaos because I think he mentioned something too about chaos, and I was like, oh yes, chaos is a interesting word. It's almost becoming the word of the week. How does that word make you feel right now?
I resonate with it so much at the moment, just because I feel like I'm juggling a lot, and a lot of it's kind of up in the air, and you're just trying to make sure the things that can't hit the ground. There was something I heard recently that was like about kind of prioritizing things. It's like you got to realize which things are plastic and which are glass, and at different times different things will be plastic or glass, but at that time you need to know which ones you can let fall and they'll be fine, and which ones you really can't. So I feel like right now everything looks like glass right now. That's the problem. It seems like I'm trying to not let anything hit the ground, and it's I think just learning to not let your perception of how important something is necessarily be the be all end all to the reality of it. Just because you have somebody who, if for them that's the most important thing, but like they really don't need it for like another month, it's like, look, I have this thing that's due in 2 days, I need to put that first and then we can talk. I think it's learning to kind of value your time enough to understand that just because people are making a lot of noise about something, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's actually as important as all that, if that makes sense. So that's kind of what chaos is like for me right now. It's just sort of trying to keep a lot of different people happy, and everybody seems good, but just in my own world, I just have a certain level of performance. And when you have so many things going on, you really need to be realistic about what you can give to each one of those things to stay sane. So it's like a really long answer, but
no. You feel free to go off on tangents as much as you want to.
Awesome, because especially like without maybe being as rested, I think tangents are probably a little more likely.
Yeah, I think 2020 COVID. No, that's part of, again, we tried to do the recording before, and I just felt like it was kind of heading in the direction that I had told you originally that I didn't really want to go anymore. Like, I feel like this is much more organic. It's much real. Hearing each other's problems and talking them out is a much more real situation than just me asking you about your career as you're all pent up, all that energy is pent up inside of just wanting to talk about the other things.
Especially like when you're talking about how you got started, and it feels like things have morphed so much even since then. It's like, it's interesting, but it's something that it sounds weird to say I've been asked a lot, because it's like so many people have asked about my story. It's not that. It's just I've been asked enough that I have like kind of like a boilerplate thing that I do for it. Yeah. And I more or less have that kind of on my website. So I'm always like, mostly it's like students that are like writing their dissertations or something on like sports media or women in sports media or something like that. I get stuff like that a lot, but I just kind of want to copy and paste my my bio, because it's I guess because I've just said it enough times that I feel like it's super boring, and maybe it's interesting to some people, but to me it's like super boring. So I like pivoting to something that's sort of not talked about as much, probably.
Yeah I mean, I told you the other day that John and I had an amazing conversation for the podcast, and which is out tomorrow.
Yeah, I
And
feel like mine is not going to be
you can't
nearly
compare.
as interesting. John is amazing. I know, but that's part of my problem. I compare.
That's
I'm
a lot of our problems as creatives, and especially with social media, we like to compare. But
mhm.
when it comes to these things, everybody, I'm sure you've heard it with nutrition, like every body type is different. So everybody's going to react to different types of ways of approaching nutrition. Same with this, like talking about things, everybody has a different point of view, story, opinion, perception, and you can't really compare it to anybody else's because
Fair enough.
it's yours.
All right, I'll try not to. Also, nice coffee mug. I love that
Uh,
you have a branded coffee mug just
yeah,
for the.
I did this a while ago. Was trying to make some merch for it, and then didn't really work out. But I still have a coffee mug out of
No, it totally worked out. You got a coffee mug out of it.
it.
That's the only souvenir I would ever get on trips. Like whenever I was traveling with USA Today, I always was like, I had to find the Starbucks because I'm very particular about it. It's the Starbucks You Are Here mugs, and actually, I've got mine from Canada.
There
I
you
did
go.
MLS Cup in Toronto.
Mm,
I was there
I
for
love
like 2
that.
days, but I still like. I'm like, hey, I went to Canada and I got a mug. So
Oh yeah,
I
souvenirs
dig it.
are. I used to be a big fan of souvenirs. Now I just like, unfortunately, whenever I'm traveling, I'm like, I can't wait to get back. I just, especially when you're working, you're just kind of like, all right, do the thing, see the thing from the car, the airplane, and then you're back home. So,
I will say I only really got the mugs from the places where I had like a memory that I kind of associated with it that was positive, or if it was a city that I just always kind of had wanted to go to. So like
mm,
whenever I get out my coffee every morning, I'll get to a different city and I'll kind of remember like that cool thing I got to do, or that editing trip that I survived.
oh
Probably
yeah,
more likely, but
survival memento.
but yeah. So anyway, I noticed that, and we don't have to talk about mugs too much longer.
Oh,
But
you know,
props.
coffee mugs or something. It's like it should be like a thing in a way, like sneakers are. Um, but
That's my thing. I don't understand the sneaker. I'm slowly starting to get into it,
sneaker
but
culture.
just a tiny bit.
Well, do you
Only
feel like
because there are some like creatives. Some of these creatives out here are really, really into it, and I
mhm.
just kind of feel like the more that I see it, I think it's just the frequency that I see it, and I'm starting to be like, man, maybe I should work on this because my shoes are kind of lame. So.
No, I think yeah, I've been I think it's more so with me and like being around athletes, like
Mm-hmm.
when you're around them more and more, I kind of want to relate on the the fashion side of things. I mean, I
Right.
dress like I'm pretty basic. I'll dress like I have like a black t-shirt on with jeans and then whatever shoes I pulled out of the closet that day. But at least
Mm-hmm.
I can like find a way to relate, at least with the shoes. So there we can
Yeah.
have a conversation on shoes. I've thought about that. Um, are
Yeah, I
the
found the more that I did like basketball, the more that I
yeah,
noticed shoes because it's just
yeah,
such a part of that. So
exactly. Don't you think like a lot of the student athletes are like that too?
it's becoming, I think, because of social media, like it's just, they're able to present themselves on the same platform as the professional athletes. And yeah, they'll do like photo shoots that are just like lifestyle-y type stuff you might see in like an Under Armour campaign or something like that. And I'm like, I kind of dig it because I'd love to do some stuff like that, just like in general to kind of do like advertising type stuff, but like with
Mhm.
student athletes. Obviously not in like an actual branded way, but just sort of that along that vein of like the fashion side. I think it'd be so fun. So I'm kind of stoked that that's becoming a part, but it's definitely when you look at it now versus like even like 3 or 4 years ago, it's just such like I guess it's maybe the influencer culture or something kind of seeping into like the sports because they have such a big platform. I don't know.
Mhm.
It's very interesting. Like I don't follow a lot of the athletes just because I mean they got their thing going and that's cool, but like I don't really keep up with it because it's a lot. Um,
Yeah.
but I did see where some of the basketball guys did this like fashion thing, and I was like, okay, okay. So
Yeah.
hopefully I get to do some of that stuff before too long. But
Have
but
you
yeah,
ever
it's
thought about
crazy.
have you thought about pitching, like doing like a fashion shoot with some of the like star athletes at Auburn?
I pitched it with basketball. Our problem we're up against right now is like the time limits that we have.
Mm,
Just with everything going on, there's just not a lot of time to do a lot of that creative stuff.
mm.
But hopefully next year we could do some of it. Basketball is kind of my sport where I have fun with that kind of stuff. I just haven't gotten to do it yet. And I think other people are on board. Like the basketball folks are on board with it. We just got to find the time to be able to make it happen. But I would love to do, there's a photo of Kobe Bryant that was a photo shoot for GQ where he's in this gray suit, gray backdrop, like one light, and a black basketball.
Mm.
And it's just so clean and so like pristine. And I want so much to get these guys in like some suits or something, just something that's kind of very, you don't see them like that very often. And plus because style has just become such a big part of it. Like when we did Isaac's NBA draft stuff and he showed up in this
Oh
red
yeah,
shiny blazer. I'm like,
he was looking fly. Yeah, he was
right?
definitely,
Like
yeah.
I wouldn't have recognized him, I don't think, because it just was so different. And I think it'd be just a blast to do kind of like a high fashion thing with
Hmm.
them if we could.
Hmm.
Anyway, so that's one of many ideas that I have for them. I'd love to do also kind of more of a street style thing. Um, but I really, really, really want to get them in like some crazy suits and do
Hmm.
some stuff. So we'll see. Maybe 2021. Hopefully we can do something like that.
I'm thinking of the street style in Auburn, Alabama. That's kind of.
Yeah. So yeah, I have ideas for that. We basically have like the one like wall where it says War Eagle on it.
Oh yeah,
Um,
there is that.
they've bricked over part of the Go Tigers side, which is unfortunate.
Hmm.
But that one War Eagle wall is like super famous. I don't know. I think it'd be fun to just even go through some of the alleys that we have and do like it's a little bit stereotypical, but just have them kind of walk around doing
Hmm.
some stuff like that. I
Hmm.
don't know. We'll see. I definitely have ideas like, and so many university photographers are just doing some wild stuff now. It's like really inspiring, and I really, yeah, I definitely am like taking notes and stuff on what people are doing because there's some pretty impressive stuff coming out of some schools.
Hmm.
So
So,
we'll see.
not to jump back into negative things, because I feel like that felt like a positive thing, but going back to the word chaos, I kind of
Yeah.
wanted to get a sense of what it's like being, a university athletic photographer during a time like this.
Mm. So having started in January of this year, which now feels like officially 8 years ago, um, like for real, for real. The fact that we're still in the same year as I started this, like I can't even, that itself is chaotic.
Yeah.
So I started mid-January, which put me right into February, which is a super busy time of year. I had the swimming SEC championship that we were hosting, and that lasted a whole week. And then after that, it was just baseball and softball, and it was just complete chaos from the sense of like, I'm just new to the scene. Like, I don't know where the baseball press box is, new to the scene. Like, for covering the first baseball game, I was like, I don't know how to get to the workroom. I don't know where it
Mhm.
is. Um, and then obviously, like the shutdown and then coming back and not having like student photographers to help out. And literally, like, so I don't cover football except for games. So like I help out, but like I'm not technically like on that sport. I'm on like all the other sports. Um, but it's still a lot by yourself. I'm definitely, I think when I got started, I kind of wanted to do everything myself because I was learning and I just really wanted to like get a good grasp on stuff before delegating because I didn't feel like I was in a good position to delegate if I didn't even know where the
Right.
press box was. You know, like I had a
Mhm.
student actually coming to help that day and she was like, "Hey, so like where is it?" I'm like, "I don't know." So I definitely started out before the shutdown wanting to kind of do stuff myself and now I don't have a choice but to do stuff all by myself. So I think when given the chance to have students again, I'll be better about delegating a lot more than I was when I started. But it's because I've had to do literally everything by myself. That
Now, when
yeah.
you say everything, how many sports is that?
Hmm. So it's been interesting because like, well, I think we front loaded a lot of the studio stuff that probably for things that aren't going to really be needing it for a while, but we went ahead and just knocked it out, I guess, while we could. That's been the biggest thing that's kept me busy, is that I've done studio stuff for track and field, men's basketball, softball, baseball, men's golf, and track and field. I mean, there's so many athletes that took a whole day to just get through. And we did a separate headshot day for them. Gymnastics. It's been a lot. Like, it's been a lot of, I don't have a studio space, so that's part of like kind of the chaotic component, is just figuring out because I'm going to these venues. I'm going to where they actually set up for the sport and have like do their practices and stuff. So volleyball, that's another one I forgot. I think I've done most of our sports, like so they call them asset shoots, and it's just like what we have to shoot for the graphics department for anybody who might be like asset shoot. So that's been one of the biggest things that's kept me busy, because obviously there really haven't been like that many actual events happening. It's just practices, scrimmages, workouts, studio stuff, all of that kind of stuff. And I think when people came back, especially as they started to have activity, they, wanted to have a lot of pictures and get on social media and start showing that we're back and we're doing stuff. And so a lot of it, I felt like, was kind of aimed at trying to make sure we were really like having a presence and showing that we were active and we're back and we're doing things and all that. So it got really busy really fast. Once we came back, it just sort of went from like 0 to 100. So right now, I honestly don't know how many sports really it's been. Like, I'm covering sports that aren't going to be happening for a while. So it's like I'm doing stuff for things that aren't really competing yet. But I went out and did equestrian. They actually had one meet. So that was kind of like, holy crap, I need to like get a lot of stuff from this one thing, because we won't have anything else on them until next year. So it's just been a lot of stuff like that. That's kind of like the chaotic component, is like stuff that's actually kind of in competition now, but a whole lot of stuff that really isn't going to be happening for a while, but that they want visuals because they'll have new students. And if we don't get something of them now, they won't have anything until next year, and that whole thing. So
man, that sounds like a lot. Oh yeah, it's like every day I see you on your stories, like carrying the white backdrop around
literally
campus.
that white backdrop. Holy smokes, that's been the story of my life. I forgot. I just remembered I did swimming and diving as well. I've done like asset shoots I haven't like gone through a list and looked at every sport. It's basically just when an SID is like, hey, can we do it this week? I'm like, sure. And we just do it. I just knock it out. But yeah, I don't feel like I have to go to a gym, because I do that setup so much, and carrying it in and out of my car. I now have a system for how I put it into my car. Thankfully I have an SUV, and I've gotten really good at that. From going from not being terribly familiar with studio stuff, I feel like that white backdrop and I are best friends now.
That's it reminds me of assisting and like carrying all the equipment for the photographer that I'm assisting. I always take a look back at, before I was doing anything in this industry, I was working at a restaurant, and it reminded me I was bussing tables and setting up party rooms, and that was like the closest thing. It's so similar in just the you're just carrying things back and forth. It's very, I guess, and it's similar like with you. It's like it's kind of the same places in a way, so it's not like you're carrying it across country or anything like that. Oh man, if anybody, if you guys don't want to, if there's anybody listening that doesn't really want to assist, just go work at a restaurant and learn how to bus tables or set up for parties and stuff like that. It's pretty close to the struggle of that.
Yeah, there's a recipe for how you put stuff together and take stuff back down, and you figure out after like the 6th or 7th time, you finally, I feel like that's kind of when you're like, okay, I need to do this and then this and then this. And yeah, that's pretty much how I have it now. Like I have not put that stuff in storage in so long. It has stayed in my car pretty much, because I would look at the calendar and see that I had another thing to do in 4 days, and I'm like, I might as well just, be a mobile studio. So yeah, I've gotten really, really good at that. I just, you know, I wouldn't mind having a studio space. That'd be great. That's kind of part of it, is just trying to make sure I don't, um, break that stuff while I'm transporting it around, and just being extra careful to like make sure this stuff can actually last.
Hmm.
Um, because I feel like it's getting beat up a good bit, but yeah, it's been very interesting to try to figure out, how am I going to set this up in like a golf hitting bay, which turned out to be actually a brilliant place because they had outlets on either side. And then at the end, you can raise the bay door up and you have just golf course.
Huh.
So that one, like surprisingly became like my favorite place to set up. But other places, you're like, you have one outlet and it's down a hallway. And you're like, all right. So it's there's no shortage of mental, challenges and things to figure out. And, it makes you feel pretty good once you do figure it out. And
Hmm.
if, across different sports, things look more or less consistent, even though you were in like 4 different venues, with varying amounts of like extension cords and power strips, like daisy chained together. But yeah. Yeah,
Um,
that's some of the chaos is just from kind of that situation playing itself out in different venues that we have.
Absolutely. We talked about this before too. Like, do you feel like after a day of shooting, like you said, I think you said you had like a one day where you shot multiple sports for asset management and stuff like that.
Mhm.
Do- the level of like mental exhaustion you have after something like that, we talked about how it kind of like compares to like almost like running a marathon or three
Mhm.
marathons. Um, like, do you feel like that's the something similar to that? Do you feel like that's something that you can compare it to? If you could compare it to anything else, what would you compare it to?
Yeah, so like I have done a lot of editing in my day. So when I was at USA Today, I most of my Saturdays or Sundays, it was every weekend pretty much. I don't know of a weekend that I didn't do this where I was editing from, we would say it was 6 p.m. to midnight, but you get West Coast events, especially
Mm,
baseball, that won't end until 1 or 2 in the morning, East Coast time or Central time. And that was like every weekend. I was on my couch just editing for hours and hours on end. And then um, when you have things like Super Bowls and Final Fours and stuff like that, I mean, you're sitting there, so you feel like you all you did all day technically physically was sit,
hmm.
but the mental element of keeping up with so many things at once, it definitely wears on you. And you just, at that point, you do have to be smart about how you sort of, you think physically, oh, I can't do another rep or something in the gym. You're like, my body's given out. I can't do another rep. I should stop now. Like, your limit between like you're building muscle, but like you also don't need to injure yourself. Like there's that same thing mentally. And you just, at first, like it feels like, man, I shouldn't be tired because I didn't like do anything today. But just keeping your brain going for that long and sort of like going past that rep where you need to stop, like it's harder to
Hmm.
tell mentally until probably it's too late and you get home and you're like, wow, I'm tired.
Yeah.
But if you're doing an asset day where you have set amount of athletes, or you're doing a Super Bowl and there's a set amount of quarters of football, like you just can't dip out and be like, okay, I'm done, I've hit my limit. You have to figure out how to like work through that. But it's crazy because, yeah, like with editing especially, um you would feel like, oh, I shouldn't be tired. And even with like the asset shoots, I finally learned like sitting down for those is the best way to go about it. I was standing for some of the ones I did early on. Yeah, and the way that I shoot, I do that photographer pose, which I hate that I do, but like you kind of hunch up a little bit and you get your stance and you kind of like lean down, and it's just like posture wise, it's terrible. Like one of our
Oh
team
yeah.
doctors said he saw me shooting volleyball and was like, yeah, because I went to see them about the concussion, but then they were also like, wow, like, you know, we can tell your neck is really tight. You can tell there's a lot of tightness here. And I was like, yeah, I know, like I'm working on it. And they told me some stuff I could do to help with that. And one of the things was posture. And that doctor saw me like shooting volleyball the next week. And he was like, yeah, the way you shoot is probably not helping you
Hmm.
at all. So
Yeah.
there's, I realized too, I was putting physical, you know, extra physical stuff on myself for the asset shoots, but I finally got smart and started sitting down for them. But there's just the mental thing of going through each person and making sure you get all the shots, because we have like a prescribed list of things that we need to get. And then you're
Mhm.
supposed to also do these sort of like reaction shots, and they're supposed to be, if they have like a thing they do when they score, or just like a general happy, like, we're number one kind of thing, you're supposed to do that. And it's just, I'm not great at posing people or prompting people. I kind of like to be like, act natural and hope for the best. But with this, we're supposed to kind of prompt them. And some athletes, you can just tell when they come in, it's not their thing. And
Mhm.
then you get others that would just be there all day, like going like Vogue magazine cover if, you let them. So um, for me, that's kind of because I'm an introvert and trying to be like, okay, so celebrate, react. And then that athlete just kind of like stands there like, I don't really want to. And I'm like, that's fine. It's okay. All day, just repeat that process, 50 times over for some of these sports, like swim and like track, especially. I just did track, there's a lot of them, and not everybody wants to do that. And that's fine. And I tend to be like, you know what? That's cool. You do you. But for me, it's definitely like at the end of the day, I was just like, okay, I need to go take a nap now. And it's like 3:30 in the afternoon. But I got there because that's the thing too. Like if a shoot starts at 9 a.m., that's not when you start. Like you start way before that, at least an hour before that, trying to get set up. And so it's just at the end of the day, for the first few times I would do those shoots, I was like, I really shouldn't be that tired. It was just taking photos on a white backdrop, but it's a lot. It is a lot. Um, if you do that for an entire day for a lot of athletes.
And you said that you suffered a concussion recently. Explain what happened and like the the after effects of all that.
Yeah, so it was our season home opener for football. So the very first football game of the year. And I've now been shooting football for at least 10 years. What I started in like 2009, I guess. Anyway, so I was very proud of the fact that I had never been run over, but that ended very swiftly at this game. So like, yeah, so they're celebrating and I get the touchdown shot and it's this cool photo or whatever. And then they're like celebrating and they keep backing up and backing up and backing up. And then by the time I sort of realized that like they're not stopping, it's one of those things where like the players kind of kept piling onto each other and piling on. So just the mass of what was coming at me kept getting bigger. Um, and they just weren't, looking, and they were happy and all that. And came at me with a bit of force, and I tumbled over and cameras tumbled over and I hit my hip really hard. So I was like, that was really the most imminent thing. I was like, my hip hurts really, 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 really badly. And I pretty much immediately had like this big red splotch on the side, and medical staff was looking at me and stuff. And they were like, did you hit your head? And I'm like, no, my hip is killing me. Like that was all I was worried about. But a couple days later, I noticed I was in the office and I was trying to like tell somebody something and I couldn't quite get the words in a sentence right. And it wasn't like it was a complex sentence or complex words. It was just, I'm going to go get this thing or something. And I was like, I thing get this. I couldn't quite get the order right. So I knew, I was like, okay, I'm not doing great, but I guess I'm just tired or whatever, because I hadn't hit my head and I hadn't passed out and I hadn't had all those sort of signature things I thought you had to have with a concussion. So I kept working that whole week and focusing on like icing my hip and monitoring the ever growing bruise that was happening there. And like that was my main focus. But I did a swimming and diving practice a week later from that, the following Saturday. It was bright and early in the morning. And then I noticed as I was driving later that day in the afternoon, and the sun was like streaming through the trees and kind of strobing in the car, I started to really not feel awesome. Like I just sort of felt dizzy and kind of like this light was overwhelming to me, which it shouldn't have been. It was just, it wasn't even like it was all that bright. It just, I was like, okay, this is weird that I feel this bad when there's not that much going on. And that and then the next day, that Sunday, um, I could just tell like my sensitivity to light was bad. And I was looking at screens and I would just get headaches and not feel good. Um, and so I talked to our team doctor and he checked me out and pretty swiftly after doing, I guess, this test, they do for concussions was like, yeah, you're concussed. So I'd been working that whole week, not realizing that I was concussed. And it made so many things make sense when I hadn't been feeling good that whole week. Like I forgot a camera for a photo shoot. Like
Mm.
I went to go by the office to get something, and it was like a practice or something. It wasn't like anything super involved. It was like, I'm gonna pop by this practice real quick. And I went by the office to do some stuff, and then I headed out. I thought about putting my camera in the bag, but then I didn't. It was like, yeah, I should have known. There were like 1,000 red flags. But yeah, after Doc diagnosed me, he was like, yeah, you don't need to look at screens. Like literally don't look at any screen at all for at least a week. If not 2 weeks. And I was like, okay. So that was kind of wild because I mean, we had people be out of commission because of maybe, like a positive test or something. Like there was this established thing that like, okay, 2 weeks people could be out because of COVID, but like 2 weeks and not being able to look at a screen or shoot anything or do anything. That was a little wild for me because I felt like I just lost all this momentum. Like we just started a football season and immediately I'm like, I had the week that I kept working and then it just 2 weeks of not being able to look at a screen after that. It was just wild. So yeah, it was thankfully, Auburn had put out this whole thing of like during this COVID time, our key word is empathy. Like we're going to have empathy with each other. We're going to have patience and we're going to be understanding because things aren't running normally. So even though it wasn't COVID related, it was nice that we had already kind of like established. Sorry, can you hear me okay? My thing just said my
Yeah,
internet went out.
I can hear you.
Okay. Anyway, so they had established like we were going to be understanding and we were going to be, open about stuff. So it was great to have that kind of culture in place from the COVID stuff because yeah, it was 2 weeks of just like, I was trying to field emails very briefly and be like, I'm not supposed to look at a screen for more than like 30 minutes was like my max per day. The doc was like, don't do any more than that. But then my body was also just, I felt so bad after a little bit. It wasn't hard to regulate, but it was hard to kind of, get people to understand, like, I want to respond to your email and there's more I want to say here, but I really need to just have some time to recover. And yeah, it's weird because I worked for a whole week after. So it seemed like I was okay, but I really shouldn't have been doing that. But for the most part, it was awesome because people were understanding. And I think if I'd felt pressure from them to like do more, I probably would have tried to push through and do more. But my boss was like, no, like the work will be there. Just take care of yourself first. So that was nice because I don't know that I would have done it without somebody like kind of telling me that. But
Hmm.
it made me a lot more aware of how often I push past my body's limits, which I had
It's
done
it,
like a lot.
it's interesting you brought that up there right at the end. They mentioned to you that there's going to be work coming out of you catching yourself back up. Um, I think that's a fear a lot of creatives kind of have in a way when there's something kind of thrown their way and they feel like they can't keep up the momentum because they're
100%.
going to lose their work. People are going to
Yeah.
move on from them or think differently of them.
Mhm.
Um, and it is good that you guys have that culture and that understanding there, especially during COVID times, because I'm sure a lot of people kind of don't have um, systems in place for that, which is weird. Um,
Yeah, I think it kind of worked out that we already sort of were in this like altered operational phase where everybody understood that at any given point, you're going to have to reschedule things and wait till later or postpone things. And so it helped me too. I think just knowing that like people were already kind of used to making a lot of adjustments for stuff. So I didn't maybe feel as guilty for like having to have those 2 weeks to bounce back. Because of that. But I mean, I think they would have still been understanding. I don't think I'm not saying that it wouldn't have been that way without COVID, but I do think, we're all just a lot more in the mode of like not putting things in stone and being flexible. And so people were already kind of there. And I think that helped me because I think I would have felt a lot more guilt if, people were like full steam and I was the only one that was, kind of like the wrench in
mm,
the system. But yeah, I think after that too, even when I was back and back to doing things normally and all that, I definitely still got to where I was like, you know, prioritizing my mental health and my rest a lot more than I have historically done. I think that was why I worked for a week after I did it, because I just was like, I'm fine. I'm not like, I didn't get knocked out, so I'm good, but I definitely was not 100%. I was so not 100%, but that's just sort of been like, I think a lot of people do that. We try to
Yeah.
push through even when we know we're not okay, but because it's not a broken leg. And sometimes I kind of wish I had broken something, because it just would have been easier to say, oh, look at the cast on my leg. Like, no, I'm still not okay. It's harder to tell people, I know I'm talking to you now and I seem like I'm good, but I'm really
Do
not
you know how many
doing
times
awesome.
I'm sure there are so many people that have wished that upon themselves, which is so sad.
Right.
Like, can I please get like, hit with a foul ball, or can I please like slip, or I don't know, something just to kind of like give yourself a break.
Yeah, I think if I had had like a knee brace on, it just got to where, especially as it went into what was the third week since it happened, but the second week of the recovery, um, it just was like, yeah, I'm like 70%. So yeah, I probably could do some of this stuff, but if you try to start running on a broken leg before it's fully healed, you're just going to add to that recovery time. And there's this understanding that everybody has for that, because broken bones are pretty, straightforward. It's broken or it's healed, or, you have a brace on or you don't. Um, and yeah, it got to where, we were trying to start, I think, scheduling stuff again. And it just was like, technically I could, but it was sort of becoming a call for me to make on whether I was ready to go back or not. And it was tough for me because I felt guilty,
Mm,
missing stuff, or not getting back to it sooner. And I think, oh, if I just had, if I knew my knee was messed up and the doc was saying, no, your knee's messed up, you can't run, it was easier to be like, well, look at this cast I have, I can't go back. But when it's mental stuff, it's definitely a lot harder. But I got better, I think, after that, because it freaked me out,
mm,
for the first week for sure. After he told me I'd like actually been concussed, I was like, my brain, like I'm such a thinker, and I'm just like, the fact that like my brain might not be 100% was really scary for me.
mm,
And so I think I got to be a better steward of my health and my brain, physical and mental health after that, just because I realized you don't have to say yes to everything to be good at your job in this industry. And I think that's what people think, because it's your passion, it has to be your every living breath and moment. And that's not the case. You can be passionate about something, but have other things that you like to do, or, other things that you spend your time on, like resting and eating healthy and that kind of stuff. It's just, I think, the culture that has to be all consuming sort of was getting to me more than I even realized.
mm,
Um, so I think it made me better. I'm actually glad, glad it happened, because I think without it, I would have just kept going and going. And there's stuff that I have since been like, you know what, I can't do this event after having done this other event all day, just because it's too much. It's too
yeah.
much. And that's not something I think I would have said before the concussion. So I'm
Mm,
kind of grateful for it in that way. That I got better at just having boundaries, or at least
mm,
trying to have boundaries. I don't always succeed, but I at least am now aware. And have, when you have doctors tell you like, you need to not push yourself, only you can know that you're pushing yourself too far, and you have to be an advocate for yourself. And I wanted so much for them to be like, I wanted them to tell other people like, no, she can't, because, like whatever, but I had to be an advocate for myself. And that's one of the toughest things to do. And I think a lot of creatives probably are like that too. And that we enjoy seeing other people enjoy what we do, and we enjoy, especially for like sports and kind of a news background, you don't want to miss a moment. Like that's something that provides you this adrenaline rush that you just don't get from a lot of other stuff. And to know that you're going to miss things, you just got to make peace with that at some point. Like if you're going to if you're
yeah.
going to do a job, especially that requires you covering a lot of sports, um, you just got to figure out like at which point, what your limit is, and not feel like you're doing a bad job because you're not capturing every single thing that's happening all the time. And the
Right,
same with
right.
news. Like at USA Today, we got that too, where it was just like, you know what, there's just going to be things that we're not going to have all the time, because like you just can't be everywhere all the time.
Yeah. No, that reminds me of last year with shooting baseball. Never in my life have I experienced that level of like trying to be creative that much, that consistently. It's shout out to a lot of the people who can kind of handle baseball like that, because especially dealing with like things outside of work, on top
Mhm.
of already trying to be creative every day and trying to flex that muscle every day. I mean, it came to a point where, you know, I ended up just going to the press box after like 4 innings and
Yeah.
just sitting there, and I was just ready for, somebody that was in charge to walk in and be like, yo, like, why are you up here? Like
Right.
I
Yeah.
was just kind of like, you know what, I'll take it. I need to step away. They don't need just me down there. They have other people down there getting things for the same reasons. I
Yeah.
can step away. And when I kind of pushed that to Kevin too, like if Kevin needed to step away for a moment to take a break, like I got him. Like go go do you for a minute. Like
Yeah.
it's really important to when you feel that, kind of act on that rather than kind of compartmentalize it and not act on it, and then later on down the road it's just like your brain's melting. It just feels like, I don't know how to describe it still. It's
No,
a
you have a finite amount of energy and mental capacity,
mhm.
and there's only so long that you can go with pushing through that, concussion or not. Like,
Yeah.
I think we have like lowered the bar for, the point at which you need to like take a break. I think we've said, oh well, no, it's only when you're like completely toast that you can take a break. It's like, I think the biggest thing for me with the whole concussion thing was just realizing that, it's kind of like in your car, you have that reserve tank. You don't really want to, I think we've normalized getting to the bottom of the fumes of the reserve tank as like, that's your normal operation level. It's like, no, that should be a reserve tank. It needs to be there for
Yeah.
when you have exhausted everything else. And, we've almost made it like a point of pride that you're able to like push through, keep going, like whatever. But if you are able to delegate, if you do have a support system there, like we've got to normalize using that. And I fully plan on when we have student photographers again on utilizing that, because it's a chance for them to get out there and get experience, but it's also there's a point at which you have to realize like there's not there's only so much glory in being able to handle everything yourself all the time by yourself. And I think we've made a big deal about like, oh yeah, I did this and I did that and I did that, and like having your name on all these different things. But
Yeah.
um yeah, I'm past that phase. Like I'm good. I've gotten to do some stuff that I am proud of. But I think knowing when to make that call of either getting rest for yourself, like knowing at what point you're doing the job. Um, it's what am I trying to say? It's just like I feel like this list of 10 things is what I need to do a good job. But really, all they've asked me to do is three. And I've just added those other things myself, like the creative
Mhm.
stuff. Like I always am like, oh yeah, I want to do this, but I also want to like get this and do something edgy and different. And some days you just need to shoot the stuff when they scored, and you just need to get that done. And that's what they've asked you to do. And you've just put this extra work on yourself to also get this
Mhm.
super creative silhouette shot, or, whatever, this extra stuff that you just feel like you got to do. And I think, yeah, as it gets to where you have, 10 events in a week or something, you just need to understand what it is that you need to do, that they're asking you to do, and what it is that you've kind of put on yourself, and maybe trim away some of that extra stuff just so you can make it. And so it's frustrating because like I'm like you, I like to have those creative moments for every event that I do. And I think accepting that that's just not plausible.
Mhm.
Sometimes just even physically, like, if you're maybe elevated or something, you're just not as close as you'd want to be. It's just, you're not going to get some of the stuff you might normally get, and making peace with that and realizing that that does not indicate that you are any less of a photographer. It just means like you've just got to be smart about where your energy goes.
Mm-hmm.
And I
I
think
think
that's important.
I think for you, what imagine that scenario where you're exhausted. Let's say it's not in the concussion,
Mhm.
like without the concussion, and you're mentally exhausted. You've had so many events. You're shooting a sport one evening, and you just, like I said, like I kind of went to the press box and just try to get away from it all. Um, do you, how would you approach somebody coming to you when they notice that you're like, oh, you're trying to take a break, but you should be out there? Like, how would you interact with that person, or how would you, um, I guess what I'm trying to say, like, to avoid the confrontation, because we don't want it to become like this thing of like, I'm like tired, I'm exhausted, but at the same time, you don't want them to tell you like, get back out there, like, go, like you should be working, like you can't.
Oh man, that would be the worst. Like that's like my nightmare, is somebody coming to me and being like, basically, you're not doing enough. Why aren't you still out there? I mean, at that point, if I knew I'd gotten like, if the score was like for baseball, I'm gonna have 23 like at bats where we scored, and this one of those guys also just scored, so we already technically have a picture of him scoring. Like, I think, yeah, at a certain point it's tough because like creatives don't like confrontation. I would say in general, especially for me, like I kind of, because my favorite kind of photography is kind of that's a little more, you're a fly on the wall and like they don't see you, and I don't really like having to deal with um directing people even and telling them how to pose and stuff, let alone people who are like coming to me and saying, hey, like you should be doing this, because I constantly am in my head like I should be doing that and I should be doing, like I already have enough of that in my own head.
Mhm.
um I don't know, it would be a different response before and after the concussion. Like it sounds so weird. I hate to keep going back to that, but honestly, like it just it freaked me out so much that like before that I would have been like, oh my bad, okay, like I'll go do it. But if I know that
Yeah.
I've done a good job, I think we've discounted too much of our own. We're always feeling like we haven't done enough, or we haven't done good enough, or we can do better. I don't think we ever really feel like, oh, I did a good job today, I did enough, this was good, I did well. Like I don't recall ever having walked away from something feeling like that, like ever.
Mhm.
And I think maybe we feel like that's sort of like part of our badge of honor, is that we always feel like there's more, we can always do more. But I think at some point too, like you also got to know, like, no, my work has been done. This is part of the work, is coming back and like taking this moment, and like part of the rest is part of the work. Like I don't think we've made enough of a deal about that. I think too many people talk about the hustle of it, that they don't realize that taking a moment to breathe is part of like I always think about in the airplanes, like in the emergency pages where they tell you to put on your oxygen mask before helping others. Like it's the same thing. Like if you don't take care of you and honor your body telling you to stop, you're not going to be able to be of much service to others. And that's kind of how I look at it. I hope nobody ever comes to me though and says like, what are you doing, you should be out there. God, that's a good
Mhm.
question though. I don't know what I would do. I really don't. Like I like to think that I would be like, I've done my job, you need to trust that I'm doing my job. But honestly, I'd probably be like, okay, and I would just run back out. Like if we're being real, I'd probably just
Yeah.
just just do that. I don't know, that's a tough one. Oh my
Yeah.
God.
I've never, I luckily didn't really have that happen when I was going up to the press box.
Mhm.
But I was like preparing myself every time I would go up there, more and more each time. I was like,
Yes.
if somebody wants to, come to me and explain why I need to be back down there, I'll happily explain to them, what's going on. Um, and if they can't take that, I'd be happy to leave. Like if I think which you'll hear in John's episode, like um, there's a point that you reach, like the breaking point for you was the concussion.
Mm-hmm.
And I think last year my breaking point was kind of like, I would say like halfway closer to after this middle of the season, where it's just like
Yeah.
you have to start setting some boundaries with yourself and other people before um, things get really bad. Um,
Yep. 100%. For me, it's like, I think from what I've just noticed and experienced personally, it's not until our bodies start to exhibit symptoms, like we have physical
mhm,
symptoms that we can't deny. Like we'll deny sort of feeling tired or frustrated or confused or exhausted, not able to put sentences together, whatever. We'll kind of like brush all that off. But like when our eye starts to twitch or our stomach doesn't feel good or whatever, when our body starts to literally kind of send out red flags to us, it's like we don't really, I know I haven't. I won't honor something until it's like my body is for real, like you need to stop. Um, and yeah, I think we've just kind of gotten used to that, this whole like hustle culture and this passion culture where it has to be on all the time or you're not doing enough.
mhm.
And I feel like we're seeing a lot more of that now that we've had, this forced time to stop over the summer. I think a lot of people kind of realized maybe they got to where they felt normal again and they realized how not normal they were feeling before. But yeah, I think a lot of us have that, like, we won't do anything about it until our bodies really start to kind of like cry out for help. And for me, that
Right.
was, yeah, it was a lot of things before the concussion. And at USA Today too, I've just always had this, don't stop working kind of thing going. But I definitely have had cues over the years from my body that it was time
What
to
were
stop a little bit.
what were some of those cues?
Oh my gosh. Really bad anxiety, like panic attacks. I would just get randomly like I'd be in Target, like not feeling aware that I was stressed about anything, but my body just kind of, I think because I was just sort of, I had already pushed past the limit and I just didn't have that bandwidth extra. It's just my body kind of was starting to really like tell me like if you don't stop for a little bit, this is not going to go well.
Right.
So yeah, that's what it, because Target's my happy place too. Like that's my place I go to like chill and kind of get away from things, like that.
Mhm.
I don't know how, maybe that's also an indicator that Target is like my vacation basically, but
Oh no, like especially when you, yeah, when you kind of don't really have anything to do. Like before we moved,
yes.
I would kind of go there. They're like, all right, I'm gonna go look around and not really buy anything, and then
Yeah,
that's my. It's a weird
100%.
place.
So like, yeah, no, I mean, it's the little things too. I think too, when you're stressed and like during the shutdown and stuff, I think people started to realize it was just little things that you needed like in life to kind of be happy.
Mm,
Like just being able to go to Target even got to be like a thing to be happy about, just to be able to go and like kind of relax about it. But yeah, I've just probably gotten way too used to, and I'm sure a lot of other people have too, way too accustomed to operating at a very, very subpar level. And as it got to be where I was starting to try to go back to work and kind of easing back into it, I would tell people in a percentage like how well I felt I was doing, like, or how well I felt recovered. So I was at like 87%, and I literally was kind of 1% a day. It really was like this. And at one point, I was like sort of stalled out at like 93%. I wasn't quite there, but like I kind of wish we could do that all the time, Somebody could be
right.
like, "How are you?" Doing today. You could be like, 72%. And they could be like, okay, you probably need to go take a break. Um, but yeah, I think we ignore a lot of the stuff until it's just really like debilitating, which is not the way it should be. I think we feel guilty or we feel like we should be doing more just because we are able to look online and see people hustling and doing stuff all the time. I think it's this really weird sense that you just kind of constantly have to be doing something toward your career as a
Yeah.
creative. And if you're not, then you're going to get behind. It's this wild, wild phenomenon.
I just had a conversation with a younger creative a couple hours ago, and it sucks because I was wanting to record it because I'm going to start doing those things kind of like as like supplementary things for the podcast, but um, ended up stopping the recording because I felt like he didn't have like all his questions kind of together, but we ended up actually having a good conversation afterwards. And he was explaining to me that I could kind of get the sense that he was one of the kids that kind of goes with this like hustle and grind culture that's been kind of like a pandemic itself. Um,
Hold on, it broke up. I lost you there for a
that's
little
okay.
bit.
It's okay. It says connection is unstable. We'll just kind of keep going until it cuts us off. I don't know what the last thing you heard was, but
You talked to
the,
him, his questions weren't quite fully formed,
yeah, yeah. He
and you felt like he was one of those younger creatives that does something.
yeah,
That's where it cut off.
yeah. Okay. So he was pretty obviously he was one of those creatives that was sucked into the hustle and grind culture of things.
Mm,
Younger dude. I mean, I get it. That's like implemented by friends all the time, I'm sure. Social media, of course. Um, and then he was telling me about how he just had a relationship end because um, and he was kind of putting it on the girl. He was like, yeah, like she didn't understand that I needed to go off and do these things and I had to keep canceling
mm,
dates. And I like made it a point to like kind of like everybody live their life however they want to, but I made it a point to him like watch it, start working smarter and not harder, because things
yes.
just like that ruin your life as you get older. Like if you think that that's
Yeah.
okay now, when you're like my age or older, you're going to think that's okay even more. And then you're going to start, pushing people
Mm-hmm.
away. That's It was an amazing example of what's happening. And he was like, well, yeah, I
Yeah.
mean, it's true, but still like she wouldn't understand. Um, like he kept kind of pushing me on it a little bit more and more, like
Mm-hmm.
which is, young, hungry, creative probably would. But I threw out the example too of like how my wife's family like tells her all the time, like, you know what you married when you know who you married when you got into it all. And like that's not necessarily something that should be on her.
Yeah.
That's more so something that I need to get better about doing. And um I mean, part of why this podcast exists now is just to start having these conversations so that we don't get burnt out doing what we do and our families don't get burnt out doing, being being a part of our lives.
Right.
um
Yeah. It makes me think of I'm really into like the early space program days
mhm.
and the whole like the astronaut wives culture, which is like
Oh,
not something that they really talk about a lot. You talk about these great astronauts and all this stuff, but I just watched The Right Stuff, the Disney Plus
oh,
series they did,
okay.
and they showed a lot about what the wives kind of had to deal with, and
Explain about a little bit more on that. That's interesting.
yeah, so these women married these guys when they were like fighter pilots, test pilots, whatever, so they knew they were getting a certain level of like risk with these
Mhm.
guys, because none of them married these guys after they became astronauts. It was already they had been married, they'd had kids or whatever, and then suddenly the astronaut program started up. These guys got accepted into it, and then suddenly, even if the relationship wasn't going well, it was a cultural part of the NASA program to have happy, proud families waiting at home for these brave hero astronauts. And it was this whole thing. And even, there was one that was on the verge of, they were already separated. I think they were about to get divorced, but the whole thing was you have to have a happy wife at home in order to be an astronaut. And so, yeah, these guys go off to this astronaut program and they start doing training for it and all this stuff. They're never home, but yet the wives are there with the kids and they have to look happy and all this stuff. It's so fascinating. And I think like all but two out of the original like Mercury 7 astronauts wound up getting divorced. Like marriage rates were not great in that time. I don't know how they've been since. I'm more so focused on like kind of the early days of it. But I got to talk with the second wife of the guy who was the third man on the moon, actually.
Oh,
And she
cool.
was like, Yeah, I think the second wife's kind of got the better end of the deal. Because she was like, yeah, it was just really tough for any of those first wives. That's not really what they signed up for. They signed up to
Mm,
have, yeah, military husbands, but I mean, at the time any of them got married, there wasn't such a thing as going to space or like the space program. So anyway, I'm very intrigued by the whole, like, yes, you have these men that are like these like space heroes and stuff, but there's a whole lot of other stuff sort of in their wake that didn't really go that well, but that had to kind of be sacrificed for that cause. And um, while sports photography is important, I don't even think going to space, I think there should have been balance in that, but it's a different time or whatever. But just it's the culture. There's this culture that right now that permeates, I think, especially creative stuff, but just in general, that work in America is like the most important thing in your life.
mhm.
And being successful is the most important thing you can do with your life, whatever that means. Usually right now it's like money and exposure and that kind of stuff. The more people who know your name and know your work. But really, I mean, when you're like 70 years old, and like
Yeah.
I don't know. I would rather have those connections. And if you really want to make it something that is also of service to just your work, then you could say, well, like, you need that rest and you need those connections to fuel what you're able to do when you're at work and to feel better when you're at work if you really want to make it work centric. If that's going to be the thing that motivates you, like, but just as far as just, I don't know, thinking past the era that we're in right now, like, yeah, it's going to be a lot of people that are alone, I think, because they're going to
No,
have
no,
just had that singular focus. And I
yeah,
don't think it has to be so singular in order to be successful. I think we've just made it that way that like you have to have nothing else going on in your life. You have to be shooting every day, all the time, every day in order to be successful. And I think that's a lie that we've all just sort of believed.
hmm
And I really hope that if I feel like through the pandemic, people have started to kind of be like, wait a second. I feel like people have actually had time to kind of stop because they had to stop, not because they
right.
chose to, because they had to. And I do feel like I'm seeing more people, and I'm sure the people that I'm seeing being public about it only represent a small portion of the people that actually feel this way, but people who are just kind of like, wow, I need to have balance. And I feel like between this podcast and others that I've listened to, it's just I think a lot more people are kind of having that moment of like, I don't have a life outside of work and I
Yeah,
want one.
right.
um, and I'm allowed to have that. And that's good to have. It's not that, being completely dedicated to work is like the be all end all of my existence.
Right. No, I think it's great to start the conversation now. I think it's um, one of the things that I wanted this podcast to kind of do, and John mentioned that, his podcast too, is to start calling out these problems as they are, like, not like kind of going around and explaining like, well,
Mhm.
I'm not really happy, and like, like teams, organizations, you know, a lot of people are not taking into account, and this is not just the creative industry anymore. It's a lot of people aren't taking into account like the people that are working for them in their personal lives.
Mhm.
It's hard to say that photography is not rocket science or being an astronaut, but it's kind of weird how similar that work life balance is compared to what they go through on a day-to-day basis. And I can speak
Yeah.
from being a married individual that it's definitely it's I want to say I grew up in a military family, and I've been around a bunch of military families. It's pretty fucking close how similar
Mhm.
my life can be compared to their lives.
Yeah.
Um, and I am open to having the conversation begin. I think where I'm still struggling, and maybe some of us that are starting these questions are struggling, is figuring out the how a perfect, I would say perfect world, but how the problems are solved.
That's the
Um,
thing. Yeah, like because you want to set boundaries. And I feel like that's kind of where it starts, where everybody kind of decides that the start line and the finish line are here and that's the way it is. But because it's so competitive, you feel like if you were to do something like that, there's a million other people ready to
Yeah.
slot right into where you are.
Yep.
And they just as rather get somebody who's willing to hustle and grind than try to deal with your parameters. So it's this real catch 22. I feel like a lot of people come up against where it's like, I want to say, no, I can't work 14 hours every day for, 3 weeks straight. But if you do that, what's going to happen? And I feel like our industry is just this weird kind of mix of like, we feel so replaceable all the time. So that I feel like that stunts a lot of like our ability to go to people and say like, and maybe part of it too is just like the people that are making those decisions not realizing what you bring to the table specifically. They think, okay, we just need
Hmm.
design or photography or social media. So, and they're not really maybe looking necessarily like the quality of that. It's just we need these things. And so we need somebody to do these things. If you can't do these things, then we'll get somebody else. Like
Hmm.
it's wild. Like it's become such a bigger part of what organizations are doing, like the visual side. But also because of that, there's so many more that want to do it. So like, yeah, it's at what point do you kind of push back? And how much do you fear, getting fired for that? Like
Hmm.
if somebody just doesn't want to deal with a photographer who wants to, or a graphic designer or social media person who wants to kind of put some limits on the grind and the hustle, like I feel like a
Hmm.
lot of organizations just want to find somebody else who will grind and hustle.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's this catch 22. I'm not really sure how we shift that. It feels like you're kind of trapped in this weird in between.
I think, and it's interesting that you have so much like of this like background in like aviation and things like that. I don't know if you can speak on this question, and I think I know a pilot that I could probably ask this to, but I wonder how they approach their work-life balance, because these people are flying, couple $1 million machines in the sky with lives
Yeah.
at stake, and you can't sit there and say that at least these pilots, um, their mental health isn't important, because if it's not, that a lot of bad things can happen.
Yeah.
um have you heard anything in that world of like?
And just very like cursory kind of research, like I do think they probably have a tendency to stifle issues they are having because then that can ground you. And I think it's a very similar thing where, they'll keep pushing through even if they're really tired
Mm.
or maybe they are having some issues with stress and different things. And like, I always kind of wish we could have it in photography like they do with aviation, though, where you sort of have a co-pilot. You have like a
Yeah.
first officer or something. It'd be nice to know, and that may perpetuate some of their feeling like, oh, I could still do this because I always have that other person in the other seat. But yeah, I do tend to find like the parallels between the two industries because they're just the ones that fascinate me the most. But yeah, I feel like there's like for them it's like the high stakes of what they do. And then for us it's that feeling of just replaceability and like there's a lot of motivation to not reveal the bad days that you're having.
Right.
um and yeah, yeah. No, I like that question. Anytime you can tie in aviation with it, I like it. But
I'm gonna have to
yeah, they're
reach
both
out
right now
reach
some pretty crazy industries to be in.
Oh, I'm sure. Yeah, that's
Yeah.
the I'm gonna have to reach out to the pilot that I know, and see if they have anything for that, because um man, that would be crazy to think if they don't have something for that by now. Um, because that makes me think about every time I fly, like what's going on in the cockpit? Like
Right?
what kind of day are they having? Like,
Right?
did
Like
they get
I've
enough
thought about
sleep?
that when I'm like really tired. I'm like, what if I had to go? What if I was put on a flight and I knew I was supposed to fly, at like 7 a.m. and I couldn't really sleep? You just have some nights you can't sleep. So I'm like, but what
Right.
do you do? At what point do you call that? At what point have you had pilots over the years when you've been on those morning flights that didn't have a good night's sleep? And yeah, it's wild. It's wild because I think I know I tend to forget, like I'm aware there's a pilot out there, but at the same time you get on this plane, you don't really see them through the doors usually. So, and like photographers, like you really don't see us there usually. You just see our work. And yeah, I like that parallel. I need you to ask your pilot friend that question. The one that I know the most, he's a captain and he um gets to come home a good bit. So I think
Yeah.
he's a bit of an outlier. He's been doing it for a very long time, and it's different.
That's interesting that you bring that up. I think back on the conversations I've had with like people who have been in the industry longer, that
Mhm.
back when they could shoot like a season of a certain sport and make enough money to literally just take the time off to
Yeah.
just enjoy their life and their family, and how much
Yes.
that's changed. I mean, I
Yeah.
kind of think that that's something that um could be thought of in a sense again with when it comes to creatives now. Like, do you feel like that makes sense for the type of industry that we have now?
I think so, although I don't know if I can see it replicating itself in 20 years.
Mm,
I think I found myself when I was at USA Today kind of envious of those photographers that did kind of hit this point that we're at now in our careers, like back in the 80s or something, when it was like, I hate to be like when it was simpler times, but it was simpler times because just physically they didn't have internet stuff, and they were like developing photos and faxing one of them to a newspaper. I mean, it was like, it was just a slower pace. It was literally a slower pace. And just I feel like less competitive. I mean, I'm sure it was still competitive industry, but it just feels like photography is so much more accessible now. You have a lot more
mhm,
people trying to do it. Um, and the access they got back then, man, just like we have a couple of guys, one on East Coast, one on West Coast, that do like entertainment photos, and they get to do the Olympics. They get like the marquee events, and they've just got all these great stories that you just wouldn't get now access wise.
mhm.
And I would find myself very often just in awe of their career, and just like I told you about the Sports Illustrated photographer, I think I was telling you, where he like got a start because he was shooting from the stands and then just sent his portfolio to the team, and they were like, oh yeah, we should have a team photographer. And
Right.
it's just, you get those like wonderful stories like that, and I just don't see that happening now. I mean, you kind of get some of these like shoot your shot moments where somebody has some internet moment and things happen for them, but
Yeah.
um I feel like, yeah, they kind of built their careers during such a different era, and now I feel like they can kind of like go off of that momentum that they built when there wasn't as much competition, when it was a little bit slower paced. And I just don't see our current generation. I'm curious to see where we all are, in like 20 years, like if we still have the capacity to do it, or if we just burn too bright too soon,
Mm.
and if that's going to still be there for us. Or if by then phones are going to basically have telephoto lenses built in, and everybody's going to be a photographer, and every game has, if there's 50,000 seats, there's 50,000 photographers basically. Like I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't
Yeah.
think it's actually going to be like that crazy, but at the same time it's just like, yeah, it feels like everybody's a photographer. And
All right. Um, so explain why are you so fascinated in aviation?
God, I don't know, because my dad was the chief of nuclear power on a submarine. It's like the most opposite thing you
Whoa.
could ever have. He's like underwater, and all I want is stuff that's in the sky. Like, I don't know what it is. I do think, so I don't remember when we lived in Connecticut, because he was based in Groton, Connecticut when I was really little. But when I was like 3 or 4, we moved to Charleston. And so we were close to the base there. And I just remember hearing planes go over all the time when I was little. So I don't know if it's just part of this, like, home is where the planes are going over, and that sounds like home to
Mm,
me. And somehow that grew into, like, I don't know.
mm-hmm.
um, but yeah, um, it was never anything like, even as like a kid, I was super cognizant about. But when I finished graduate school, which was in technical writing, um, I knew I love sports, and I love the adrenaline of that and the excitement of that. So I was like, okay. So I tried to do that for a little while, but that didn't work out. Like try to get him like be a photographer for like ESPN or something. They didn't want me, so it's fine. Um, I had like 3 seasons of football experience under my belt as a student, so like I don't blame them one bit. But
Mhm.
when I finally started coming back around to technical writing jobs, realizing that that was like probably the more practical way to go. Aviation was one of the big industries where technical writers can have jobs. It's going to be in stuff that is obviously like very technical. So a lot of engineering stuff, government stuff, but aviation was the one that kind of like piqued my interest the most. So yeah, it kind of like really accelerated my interest in it. I started applying with different airlines and I got in at Southwest and I got to like their headquarters is right next to the runways. I don't know what it is. I cannot explain it because it's not like anybody in my family was a pilot. My own, and then we moved away from Charleston when I was like 8. So it was really only a few years when I was really, really little that planes were like flying overhead. And I don't know if that was enough to
It's stuck.
instill it in me for the rest of my life. But yeah, when we have flyovers at games, that's like my favorite. It's all the things coming together that I love in one place. So
I'm gonna think about that every
yeah,
time
but
though
they're
I'm gonna
also
fly over.
what's that now?
I said I'm gonna think about that every time after or during a flyover from now on. I'm
Oh
just
my
like, oh,
God.
Shanna must be freaky.
I wish they would just let me ride along with them for one of them, just like for pictures, you know?
Exactly. You should. Did you
Yeah,
see
I
the
don't
stuff
know.
that? Did you see the stuff that Rob did in the blimp a while back?
No.
Yeah, Rob Tringali got to
It's gonna make me
was
jealous, isn't it?
I'm pretty sure. I don't know if it's on his site or not, but I know he shared photos of him. It was for an assignment that he did where he got to fly in the Goodyear blimp during a game day or something like that and take photos of that, like documenting that process.
It's nice. Now, one of my favorites was the guy who does like the picture of the stealth bomber flying over like the Rose Bowl or something.
Mm-hmm.
He gets in his little private plane and he's piloting it, which goals, and just banks it and like shoots the photo, and it's the plane directly over the field, and it's just like
Yeah.
all the chef's kisses in the world. Let's see. I don't see it on here, but I will do some investigating later.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I actually live um, close to the airport here in Auburn, so like right now I hear planes going
I think
overhead.
I hear it too. Yeah.
It's yeah. I don't know what it is, but I just love them. Like I when I lived in Texas, I would go like plane spotting a lot. I would just because I mean it's just they're constantly going. But yeah, Southwest definitely made it worse because like we were right there by the runways, and I could go over into the maintenance hangar, which meant like planes would just be parked there, and I could just stick my head up in like the landing gear bay, and that's just I miss that.
That's
I do miss that. The technical writing side wasn't for me, but man, that just like solidified my love of planes. But it's a lot like sports though. Like when I did the stuff in Death Valley with the jets going through there, I mean, you don't know what you're going to get. You don't know
yeah.
what planes are going to fly through. If planes are going to fly through, it's this sort of like hunting sort of thing. But it's kind of
Mm-hmm.
like sports. Like when you start, go to a football game, you don't know really what you're going to get, but you're pretty sure it's going to maybe be something cool. And it's that
Mm-hmm.
sort of like element of not really knowing, but you hear that rumble of the plane in the distance and it's like a touchdown that's coming right at you. And it's just
Mm-hmm.
that. I love that. And you get that from both, I think. So maybe that's why. Maybe that's the connection.
I see that. No, it's interesting that you said something about you instead of going into sports and photography and stuff, you took a practical route.
Yeah.
Um, I feel like there's something to be said about the thought of creativity, art not being practical. Um,
Yes.
I remember doing a thing for United. It was just a simple like an event at a park, and I was taking photos of people coming through their setup. And I had this guy or this wife came by and she was signing something and she looked at me and she's like, "Oh, are you taking photos for the team like of this thing?" And I was like, "Yeah." She's like, "Oh, that must be so cool." And her husband looked at me and was like, are you making any money? Like kind of like
Mm.
trying to, like you could tell that there was like tension between the two of them, because it sounded like he was trying to prove a point again to his wife that, you know, you don't really make money
Right.
doing what we do.
Like maybe their kid was trying to go to art school and he was trying to say, you know, this is why the kid shouldn't go to art school or something.
Right, right. And I've
Yeah.
always found that argument to be interesting, because we wouldn't have an industry around it if it wasn't practical. So why is it seen as something impractical? You know?
I I could probably make like a really long stretch to the idea that, which I think this became more of a, okay, I'll just say it. So like sports are basically entertainment.
Yeah.
Like they don't, they entertain. Um, and it's impressive and it's amazing to see what humans are capable of. I think the way that I'm trying to think. So like during the shutdown, people I think started to realize entertainment's pretty important. Like we need something to divert our minds from what's in front of us all the time.
Mhm.
And probably just the undermining of our need for that, and like, oh well, that's just for fun. But it's like, no, but you have to have fun with
Mhm.
life. Like you need to have that balance. Like it can't be one thing or the other all the time, or you kind of get to where we are now, where we've kind of been in a lot of like stressful time and reality and all this stuff. And I think if you don't break that up, and I think that's why people wanted sports to come back so badly, because we just like, it's this part of life that like, while it doesn't directly like save lives or like ship goods here or provide this service here, I we need something besides just what's happening in front of us to focus on. So in
Mhm.
that sense,
Do you feel like it's resentment?
yeah. One more time.
Do you feel like it's resentment?
Of
Like people who don't live a life of like, I mean, I'd say everybody's pretty creative, but their jobs or their day-to-day life doesn't call for that kind of fun. But when they see it in other people and then like using that as a career path, they just kind of like, like, I wish I could do that. But instead of saying like, I wish I could do that, be like, are you sure? Is that a real job?
yeah, no, there was a comment on Twitter the other day because somebody had tweeted like, you know, what people think sports work is and what it actually is, you know, and those things. And it was funny because one of the things was like lanyards. Another one was
Oh
ill-fitting
yeah,
polos, which I
yeah.
felt on a deep level. And some guy like quote tweeted it with like, "Why are sports media people so anxious to act like their jobs aren't dope?" And I was like, I took time to like craft this response and like nobody paid attention to it, but I thought it out. So let me look it up because I actually like thought it out a bit. But it was just that like because we work in something that is technically entertainment, and because like photography is a hobby for some people. Okay, so like if you go in and you work at a desk, people don't do technical writing as a hobby. Like some things like that just aren't hobbies. But what we happen to do is something some people do as a diversion, as fun. And then we
Mhm.
are capturing things that are a diversion and fun. And I think people make the mistake that that never feels like work, or that it shouldn't feel like work, or you, if you do feel like it's work and you feel overwhelmed by it, well, how dare you, because you're working in something that's just fun and a diversion and entertainment. But it is work. um,
Mhm.
and it is something that like, yeah, it's not like necessary in the sense that it doesn't like, we're not building houses or like, I don't know, it's just this weird thing of like, we do need it while it's not as pressing as the need for like medical care workers or something. It's still a part of life that helps us stay balanced.
Mhm.
um yeah, hold on, let me see if I can find, I had it so much better worded because I took a long time to think about it and then I had to fit it in the character length.
Don't you love it when you have like, you feel like there should be a clever response, so you take your time on it, like a retweet.
Yes, and then like
Oh yeah.
nobody even noticed it, which it was kind of one of those things. I was like, I'm putting something out there that maybe not everybody agrees with, so I was also a little bit nervous that
Mm.
people might not.
No, I think about those people, like I think about that guy being my boss a lot of the time. Like every time I have like a job come up that's like under an organization, I feel like there are people like that guy in higher level positions all the time. And
Mm-hmm.
I'm just like, if there are, I'm willing to bet money that there are people like that in different organizations, and
Yeah.
to know that they don't value, they know it's like a commodity, like they need the assets
Mm-hmm.
for marketing purposes and stuff like that. They don't see the real value in what that is or what that means. They just
Right.
know they got to get it done.
Yeah.
Um, it's kind of a scary thing to think about, but
Yeah. Well, and then like, yeah, I think a lot of people in the industry work really hard to make it look like it's really cool and really great all the time.
mm,
Um, because it can be, but I don't know. My like lack of a third cup of coffee is starting to show. Um,
we won't stay on here much longer. I know you had
no,
a
it's good. I just
one.
it's fascinating to me that we've bought into what we know we do, the posturing that we do, which is to make it look like it's cool and fun all the time. And we
Mm,
see other people doing that and we believe, oh, well, theirs is even cooler and funner. And I don't, it's weird because we know we're doing it too. And we're all believing each other and all, all at the same time, we know it's not as great as any of us are showing it to be. Sort of catch 22 of like, you don't want to ever act like you're not having a good time because it's sports and it's photo. It's two things that are kind of inherently on the arts side, on the sort of entertainment side. But yeah, it's a weird thing because it's like something that everybody wants to do. So you don't ever want to say that it has its hard moments because then you're working in entertainment.
hmm
I don't know.
No,
It's
and I think
wild.
one of the closest things to seeing that in another way is like a lot of younger creative people thinking that it's that fun, like always, you're at football games, you're getting to be around these athletes, or at these, you get to be a part of these cool moments, but yet there's like, that's like maybe 15% of it,
Yeah.
and there's all this other stuff that kind of goes into keeping it sustainable and worth doing almost. Yeah, I see that a lot. With that kid that I was talking to earlier, he was just kind of
Mhm.
like, who's like, what's the coolest event that you got to go to, or what's the, and that's, oh man, now that I think about
Yes.
it, that's kind of toxic to think about when it comes to these other photo podcasts and what I was doing, because all you're doing is harping on those cool little key moments that hook younger and younger creative people in, and
Mhm.
really it's not that. You gotta show the
That's
whole.
another thing. You just reminded me of people would ask me, or people would say, "Oh man, I wish I got to shoot NFL. I wish I got to shoot Major League Baseball, whatever." They always wanted to shoot the Super Bowl and the big stuff and the big stuff and the big stuff. They'd be doing like high school stuff or whatever. And I'm like, just produce awesome content no matter what it is. Cause really a big thing is like once you get to those bigger things, it's the same thing. There's just like maybe better light. But
Yeah.
I think if you make certain things like your goal like that, like working NFL, I'm not saying you're going to be disappointed, but I'm just going to be saying like your overall goal, I think, needs to just, you need to have a passion for the work and you need to like the work because you're not always going to work for a team that you care about. Like I happen to go to Auburn, so I love Auburn. But when I was in Houston, I wasn't like a Texans fan or an Astros fan or anything like, but I liked photography. So like that was what I enjoyed. I think if, a lot of people that are like fans of teams, like are like, oh, it'd be so cool, it'd
Mm,
be so awesome. But like you gotta love the work because you're not guaranteed to work for teams or cover teams that you inherently like care about.
mm,
But also just like to me, bringing the same caliber of quality to your work and the care that you take with your work, regardless of the level of the event. Like if your goal is to shoot a Super Bowl, you're going to shoot a Super Bowl and then you're going to be like, that's it. Like, it's fine to have that among your goals, but I feel like some people just get so fixated on, like, they just want to shoot pro sports, in part because they want the clout of having shot a pro sport.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I don't know. Like, I think my favorite people are those like newspaper photographers who are covering Friday night football and coming up with some crazy cool stuff from like, you know, pee-wee football even, they'll go to like a practice on like a Saturday morning at 7 a.m. and they'll get this crazy stuff. And I'm like, that to me is like the coolest stuff. I feel like the higher level you get, the more kind of the elements are in place for you to be a good photographer. The light's nice, the the players are like at the top of their game, so like the action itself is going to be inherently more powerful. The uniforms are crisp, and like the grass is perfect. Like there's all these
Hmm.
other elements, but when you're kind of like in this like muddy, nasty environment and the light's terrible, it's just so cool when you see people come out of that with some really compelling imagery.
Hmm.
So like, I don't know, that's like, you just reminded me of that. I have not thought about that in a while, but people who ask me, how do I get to shoot that, I'm like, well, I think maybe your focus is a little bit off. That's not really,
Hmm.
just do good work wherever you are. And you might wind up there just out of that. But I think if you kind of make that your goal, it's just, you're always going to kind of be aching for that. And it's fine to have a goal and
Hmm.
to aim for higher things. And I think that's good to do. But I feel like some people are doing that for the purpose of saying, well, I shot NFL today and I took a picture of Deshaun Watson. And I was like,
Hmm.
I don't know, like it's cool. But if that's kind of your focus, then that's really not going to carry you very far in the industry, especially when things get tough and when you have those days that are those really long days where you're not getting pictures of NFL guys. When you're doing something else, like, are you going to
Hmm.
stick with it even then? And I think just being able to love it enough that you're going to slay a pee-wee practice on a Saturday morning, like that to me is like, that's sort
I
of
think
where
it,
I'm like, mad
do you feel like
respect.
do you feel like it's important to have humbling people in your life?
I think it is. I sort of like, I sort of also, and you, depending on your personality, like if you get to where you're getting, a little too big for your britches, it's good to have people to bring you back down. I have a problem liking anything that I do ever. And so I kind of need people to tell me like I'm doing okay. Cause otherwise
Mm-hmm.
I'm always like, I can do better. I can do better. I should have done better. Why didn't I do that better? I only see the things I do wrong. So I think whatever you have, you kind of need the opposite of that. But I will say that the people that I worked with at the biggest events, those events that people ask about trying to get to, I'd have people ask me, how can I shoot the Olympics?
Right.
And I was like, they're always the ones that are like, how do I shoot the Super Bowl? How do they want that big event? And I always got the sense they wanted it because they wanted to say they shot it,
Mm-hmm.
not because they just consistently kind of produced good work and whatever. It's like they wanted that kind of glory moment. But the
Mm-hmm.
people that did make it to those big events, like you didn't really talk about photography a lot with them. Actually, you saw them and they'd ask how you're doing and like, oh, we'll
Just
talk
really
about
good
the weather
people.
or whatever. But they just, yeah, they didn't feel a need to like be like, oh, I got this sick shot yesterday. It's like, dude, I edited you. Like, I know, it's fine. They were just like the nicest, most humble people. And for where we with USA Today, it would be people from like the newspapers that USA Today had across the country. And yeah, just like the nicest, they were always the nicest people. For us, at least in my experience, that were at these bigger events and didn't seem like concerned about the fact that it was this big event. You could tell they were the kind of people that it didn't matter what they were working on, they were going to bring the same caliber of work ethic to it. And I think
Mm-hmm.
that's how you get to those big events. I don't think it's having those as your goal. I think it's having just like doing a good job no matter what is your goal. And then that other stuff kind of comes in
Mm-hmm.
as a result. But I think if you're only motivated by being able to say that that's what you did, um, I just don't think that that should be your motivating factor.
Right.
To me, that's like you're in it for something else besides just photography. It's again,
Mm-hmm.
it's good to have goals. Like if you say, I would love to shoot a World Series someday, that'd be great. Um, but if that just becomes like you shoot it and then after that all you say is like, oh yeah, when I did the World Series, like that's fine, but like what are you doing now? Like I don't know, people who chase that clout, I feel like it makes you less likely to wind up in those places because you're not just putting in that work for the things in front of you now. if that makes sense. I don't know.
No, it makes sense. I think it's a very actually healthy perspective on success in our industry. Because I think if you're
Yeah.
just always trying to focus on doing a good job and being a good person, I think played a little bit into that too, because you can still, be that person that is really working hard every day and be an asshole. Like there are definitely those
100%.
people, but I
Yeah.
think it's a combination of that, like you said, good work ethic and just always wanting to be your best on top of, being a good person. Um,
Yeah. I think too little focus is placed on personality, because the same goes with athletes. If you have an athlete that performs well but constantly is like, getting busted for something
mhm,
outside of the sports world, there's a tipping point at which the talent and the hassle of dealing with these other issues, just one is going to outweigh the other. And it's the same with
right.
photography. If you're not a pleasant person, because there's a lot of times when you're in close quarters with these people, and I think being a good person to stand next to at a baseball game for 4 or 5 hours will get you a lot farther, because then if somebody knows you're good to work with and that somebody knows somebody else and an
Mhm,
opportunity comes up, you know, it's just that's I think a lot of people too, part of the hustle grind culture is sort of that like, I do this on my own, I made my own name, I did this for myself. Like people kind
yeah.
of get a little too individualistic, and I think they forget the fact that you gotta network and just be a good person, and don't forget that element of it, because like not everything is going to come down to how fire your Instagram is. Like there are a lot of people who have great Instagrams, but like I would not want to have to work with them, and I would pick somebody else over that. It's
Mhm,
There's not enough attention I think paid to that.
that's true. That is,
Yep.
it's a. I don't know. I always feel like Instagram and all that stuff is going to end up getting regulated one day, and then people are going to end up having to go back to square one if that's all they.
Yeah, well, with the new thing they have that I saw that was like, it's probably not even that new, but like basically they're like, hey, we own your stuff and we can do stuff with it and make money off of it. So
Mm,
thanks. Um, it does put me in the mindset of like, okay, you got to remember that like these platforms, like at one point I thought MySpace was like the thing. We're all, I think we're going to go in through those same sequences with everything that we have, where there's going to be
mhm,
something else that comes along that we're all going to migrate over to. And we can't let this one platform carry more weight than it should in what we're doing. I do think it's made me more aware of like having, when I look at my portfolio, I am more aware of like sort of the colors and the variety of like how I want things laid out. But um I do find myself getting way too into Instagram sometimes, and like I'll update that and then my website will not have been touched for like 4 months.
right.
Like, I'm
Yeah,
like, I need to
guilty here
fix
too.
this. So yeah, yeah. So like, yeah. But just like, yeah, definitely being a good person and just being nice. I have this thing where like, I don't know, I'm just nice to everybody I meet. And there have been times when like that was advantageous because I didn't realize that somebody was like a higher up, but I
Mhm,
just be a good person. Like you never, ever, ever know, you know, especially like in a workroom or something. Watch what you say. Watch how you present yourself. And granted, right now that seems like a distant memory of like, 20 people in a workroom together working photos and stuff. But
what do you feel like the difference is between, and sorry, this will probably be my last question so that I can get you off here, but what do you feel like the difference is between somebody who is just a good person and works well with others compared to somebody who is like a brown noser or likes to kind of kiss ass to get where they need to go?
hmm, good
Because I mean,
question.
I see, like, you can kind of see both people doing their thing, and kind of you can't tell which one's kind of being the same person, like
Yeah.
that's a big fear of mine, is like coming across as somebody who's like just brown nosing to get my way into something. Like I
I
just
think
feel like.
it's, yeah, no, like, well, you can tell if you're around somebody often enough and they're selective with who they're nice to and who they
Mm,
greet with enthusiasm. Like I show up. I'm not trying to say like I've done this right and I'm just perfect all the time. It's just like I genuinely kind of am like a puppy, and I just see people and I'm like, hey, what's up to
right,
everybody. I'm just like, how's
right.
it going?
Live life like a puppy. Gotcha.
I basically do. Yeah. And some people are like that. And some people are like house cats. It's fine. You need all types. I'm just always, I mean, like I'm an introvert, but I also just when I see, especially my photo friends, because like especially now because we just don't see them as often, I get excited. But I'm kind of the same way with a lot of people. Um, I think. But yeah, no, there's definitely some people that like they won't say a word to you, but then like some, VIP comes into the room and they're like, "Hey, how's it going?" And you're like,
Mm-hmm.
"Okay, noted."
Yep.
But if you ignore me, but then you talk to other people, it's like, okay.
Mm-hmm.
People notice that kind of stuff. And then yeah, the same goes for just like kind of people who maybe talk, like I said, was talking about with like the guys at like the Super Bowls and the Olympics and stuff. They don't really talk about their work.
Mm-hmm.
And I kind of think that when people talk about their work a lot and they try to make sure, like, look at this cool photo I took, I'm like, okay. I don't know. I just feel like, let your work talk for itself. That's kind of
Mm-hmm.
like a tenet of mine. Like and that's another weird balance too, is like being proud of what you've done and acknowledging something that you've done well, but then also like not coming off as too like stoked off of your own talent.
Well, we live in an industry where talking about your work and showing your work is super important. So like I
Yeah.
think a lot of the times, I've definitely been guilty of it where like I didn't need to be talking about my work in this particular conversation, but somehow I ended up working my work into it. I have
Yeah.
a friend that is a actor, and I think that he always feels like he's got to be projecting his like
Like on.
actor life. Yeah, yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. There's a fine balance between like promoting yourself in a like a healthy way and then like I think some people get too much. And again, I think some of it's like that hustle grind culture where you just feel like you constantly got
Hmm.
to be like, look, look, look. And it's just, I don't know. I'm sort of caught in between though, the two. Like I did come from kind of like a more of an old school editorial. Like my first, where I learned all of this stuff was in more of like the vein of sort of the news world and
Hmm.
that side of things. So I don't really have as much. I don't know. I'm somewhere between those two because I'm kind of like in this new vein of like doing the social thing and trying to figure out presets and stuff. But then there's also this old school side of me that has this news side from my USA Today time. So I'm kind of caught between like those two worlds. So like
Hmm.
I haven't been a freelancer, so I don't know how I would handle trying to promote my work in a way that was
Yeah,
engaging. For
yeah.
me, it's just I would probably be bad at that because I'd be like, "Hi, this photo might be okay, but it might not be. I hope you like it." I don't know if I would be able to be. It's just a weird tone that you have to kind of set for yourself, where you have a confidence about your work, so people
Hmm.
can tell that you know what you're doing and they can trust that you know what you're doing. And that's another thing is like somebody who's kind of like not super confident, trying to go into something where you know how to do what you're doing, but projecting that in an open way so that people can then trust you and feel comfortable with you. Like that's been a challenge I've had to overcome. So I don't know. But in workrooms, I will advocate for not talking too much because it's
Yeah.
a tight space and everybody can hear you. And the likelihood that, if we're all at a game, other people got a similar shot to yours, but you're the only one being like, wow, I nailed this. It's like,
Yeah. You're
okay.
that guy.
Yeah, yeah, just don't do that. Don't do that. Just let it speak for itself. So
Exactly.
anyway, I don't even think
Well,
that was your original question, but
no,
tangents.
that's perfect. It's totally fine.
Awesome.
I think we have had a great conversation. I think this is the longest podcast I've done so far, which is
Oh
very cool. No, that's not a problem. That
no.
is not a
Okay.
problem. I see other podcasts, like I look at Joe Rogan's podcasts that are like 3.5 hours, and I'm like, they had stuff to talk about. Like that's totally fine.
Dang. Yeah, no, I've got one queued up right now. I do the armchair
Oh
expert
yeah. Hmm.
podcast a lot when I'm walking Piper, which is genuinely what I'm about to go do. So like I've got one. It's Matthew McConaughey. It's been really interesting so far. So highly recommend it if you're looking for something because I was doing a lot of industry centric podcasts for a while there, like during my like no screen time phase. Um, But yeah, the armchair experts are like an hour and a half long. And
Yeah.
that's long enough for me to get like 2 decent walks with Piper out of. So it's really great because then if I'll get like halfway through and then I know I'll have like the other half to look forward to for tomorrow's walk with Piper. So that's what we got coming up.
All
But
of
3
the so
hours.
yeah, yeah. I don't we've been about almost 2 hours. Right.
I guess you're right.
Um just a side note with the Matthew McConaughey stuff, like all those interviews that he's been doing about his book are amazing. Like you'll
Dude,
listen to that.
I didn't know he had a book out.
Yeah.
Let me
I
see.
got the book on Audible.
Did you? Oh man, so it's because he's reading it.
Yes. Yeah, he reads it. Yeah, I highly recommend people like getting the book first of all and definitely listening to the book, because especially when actors are reading their own books or an actor is reading a book, it's awesome.
Yeah. No, like just hearing him talk about it on this podcast and in his, drawl that he has and explaining these wild things that happened in his childhood where he was like, yeah, my dad and my mom, and there was this knife and they fought and I was, 4 years old. And I was like, dude, what?
Yeah. Yeah.
I didn't realize he had the whole book as like an Audible
Mhm.
book. So yeah,
Do
I'm
you
gonna
have
have to
an
check that
Audible
out.
account?
I need to do that. Yeah, I've been a bad dog mom and haven't been taking Piper to the park as much, in part because I have photo gear in my car and I can't fit her in there. Um, like because I have light stands, I can't fit my dog in the car.
Right.
um, but yeah, I've been really getting into and loving the sort of like when I'm walking Piper, I usually do it at the end of the day, and that lets me know I made it through another day. I got through, like, this is sort of my like moment of the day where I'm like, okay, you're doing all right.
There's That's interesting that you bring that up. I think that would be a really good ending point on our conversation. There was I don't know what podcast it was I was listening to, but they were talking about how it was something that my wife and I were listening to in a car ride, and how our anxiety during the day needs a cue that the day's over, or like the
Was it
if we go
Brene
back to,
Brown? Because that's where I got that from.
I think so. I think it was. Yeah, it was the two
Oh my God, I
sisters.
think it was the same episode because yeah. Yes. Yes, the
Yeah,
burnout episode.
yeah,
Yes,
yeah.
I was
I think
heavy into Brene Brown during my no screen time phase.
oh,
And that is 100% where I got that from, is like having
yes.
that physical cue for your body that the day's over, the day's done, you've done a good job, like something to kind of like bookend, I think,
Mm-hmm.
your day and signal. That's so funny. That's
Mm-hmm.
so funny. Well, props to your good podcast taste
Uh,
because
yes.
Renee is amazing. Like she was, I feel bad because I had not heard of her before South by Southwest. And I was like, oh, she sounds interesting. And she's like she was one of the main, people. I was like, oh, I should listen to this, I guess, one of the main speakers. Okay. And I've been a big fan ever since. And I'm like, how did I not know who she was? I was in overflow. So I wasn't even seeing like the actual thing. But if knowing what I know now, I wish I'd gone because her stuff is brilliant. But that burnout episode that she did with the
Yeah.
two like sisters,
Mm-hmm.
just phenomenal. I think I listened to it twice because that there were like a lot of little moments in there that I kind of wanted to commit to memory. And that was one of them. Like that's my walks with Piper are kind of my like,
Mm-hmm.
you've done it.
Mm-hmm. That's
Congratulations.
that's what made me think of it. I was like, oh, that must be her cue of saying the day is over.
I love it. I love it.
I'm
Awesome.
really
Well,
bad
it
about
was
listening. I'm really bad about listening to things like that and then not like kind of like taking that specific action. Like I still need to figure out a good way of ending my day, or a cue to end my day, other than going to sleep.
no, well, and I'm very with my schedule, it's hit or miss. I was doing intermittent fasting over the pandemic because I was,
Mm,
I had all this time and also that gave me this structure to my day when you could start eating and when you had to stop eating. It sounds silly,
mhm,
but we've all been through 2020 together now and we know little things like that can help.
mhm,
But that went out the window when work came back because my schedule was just all over the place. And sometimes I wouldn't get to eat until the afternoon and then I'd be eating again at like 10 p.m. at night. I'm like, well, that's not really going to work. But yeah, the thing with Piper is I try to do it most days. And now that it's getting dark, like right after lunch, basically, it's been challenging, but we just got some little glow stick things. I just put on a little glow thing, put a glow thing on her, put on armchair expert, and we go for it. And it's one of those things that like all day I'm kind of like debating if I'm going to do it or not. Maybe today I'll be all right. Maybe I'll just like put on like the Queen's Gambit and just call it. But it 100%, even just 30 minutes going around the neighborhood helps out a lot. So yeah, maybe you should get a puppy. I think that's basically what that means.
You know, we've thought
He's
about
like,
it.
and all right, that's the end of this episode.
No, we've definitely wanted to do that. We just feel like that kind of obligation at this point is that will definitely come after, you know.
It's a lot. Yeah. Yeah. I would say, yeah, maybe get the whole tiny human thing figured out. And then, you know, maybe because like the whole babies with like the puppies thing is pretty cute too. And like, you know, they're like
Yes.
old enough to kind of like realize what's going on. And then you get a puppy. Like, yeah, I'm down for that content.
Me
100%.
too. Like I send my mom that kind of stuff all the time.
Yes.
Yeah.
I love it. Awesome. Well, I'm glad we were able to kind of have a conversation more about what the industry is really like and some of the challenges it has. So I love
think
it.
you were hitting on something there towards the end, like another thing that I wanted to talk about, but I think we can save that for another possible part of this conversation.
Okay. I mean, I'm whatever you want to do, I'm good with it. I think I'm supremely boring, so I'm fully anticipating a text where you're like,
no,
we'll try this again another day. But
I listened to So Everybody's Over Again, and there's like 3 or 4 questions I'm like, oh, I should have asked that. So there's always a chance for another one.
No, I love it. You could kind of make it a thing where you well, at the end of like armchair podcast episodes, they do like a fact check portion where basically like I think it's mostly that Monica goes back there and she's like, okay, here's the points where you were wrong. You said it was like, you know, 300 dogs a day or whatever like this, and it was only 200, you know. So like you could totally go back through and be like, okay, so we're gonna do I don't know what you would call it. You can make it like bonus content though, where you're like, we're gonna talk about the other stuff we didn't get to talk about over time.
Yeah.
So
yeah, I think that's a good idea. Well,
awesome. I just love that you're doing a podcast. Like I think a lot of people thought about starting one over the shutdown, but very few actually like did it, I think. So
yeah,
mad props,
it's hard to keep up with.
It's a lot. Like even just us getting this scheduled felt like a job. Like I felt bad because it just like kept kind of like becoming a thing. But yeah, I'm glad we made it work. But yeah, if you ever want to chat anymore, I'm more than happy to. It's funny that like between the time that we last talked and now, like I actually had a few things where either social media or just other conversations where I kind of had these moments, and maybe I was thinking about them more because I knew we'd be talking about it, but just where I started really kind of trying to put to words what I thought about certain things in the industry that I was seeing. So I felt like it kind of worked out to have a few extra days because I was starting to sort of mentally note some stuff more than others. So yeah,
it's good to prepare for sure.
Yeah, I know. I feel bad I didn't do the full microphone thing today, but
don't worry about it. Next time we'll do that.
Yeah, you're getting all the great hair and everything here today. So
well, you have a good walk with Piper.
Yes, we're gonna go give my body the signal that the day is done. That's what we're gonna do.
I need to, or I think maybe eating might be mine. Like eating, that's kind of like, oh, okay, yeah,
That's a good one. That's my favorite one, actually. That's my favorite signal to my body. Yeah, that's gonna happen after, I think, because I've been pigging out all day. So yeah, she's like officially asleep now, and not even like the tired sleep. It's just like the bored out of her mind sleep. So yeah. But anyway, let me know if you have any other like questions or anything or clarifications on stuff. I feel like I just rambled a bunch today. So
no, nope. Rambling is totally fine. It is welcome.
Awesome. Awesome.
Well, thank you, Shanna. And till next time, and I'll let you know if we want to set up another one.
Awesome. Sounds good. I'll talk to you later.
Bye. Bye.
What you gonna play now?